Proportional Response, Book 1, Chapter 11, Part 3 of Gloves and Daggers. Anibal stood, trying to get his heart to calm down, staring at the unconscious would-be assassin on the floor, and feeling quite disconcerted by the casual attitude of the Duke and his accountant about the whole affair. The Duke's security chief rushed up, and His Grace gestured towards the man on the floor.
"Pinter, take this guy away and have him sent to Cordor. They have a probe there, and we can find out who sent this guy." "Don't look at me like that. He's obviously not a professional. The chances of his making it out of this room alive, if he'd succeeded, are slim to none, even without our human friend here, and even if he'd made it out of the room and the embassy, he's on a hostile world with no place to go to ground. Now, get him bundled up and sent off as quickly as possible, please. Oh, and I want him under heavy sedation for the trip. And make sure they know at Cordor to check him for confidentiality devices. In fact, make sure that Dr. Resnick checks him before you ship him out. He might have a timer set to administer poison."
Anibal finally brought the beating of his heart under control, and the Duke turned to him to speak quietly.
"I hate to end this pleasant little party, but some of our people are starting to go decidedly green. Might I suggest you have the crowd disperse?"
He nodded to the Duke and gave directions to his secretary, and she had everyone hustling out of the room in moments. I have to admire the man. He would have been within his authority to order the room cleared, but he reinforced my authority instead. Once the room cleared, Lady Aenor shook her head and clucked her tongue. Anibal worried that she'd blame him, but when she turned to him, her expression was apologetic.
"The infighting at home has gotten worse lately. There are persistent rumors that my sister-in-law is in poor health, and it is well known that none of her children have wed, and that the final selection hasn't been made. We suspect that the Altons are trying to start up another war of houses in order to prevent us from doing anything about their war with the humans. We can't let that happen."
Anibal nodded, then shook his head and turned to the Duke.
"Wait, you said that the attempted assassin is going to be put, against his will, under a memory probe. I must protest. He is still an Imperial citizen, and has rights."
The Duke's face hardened and spoke with steel in his voice.
"He is an assassin, caught in the act of attempting to murder a member of the royal family. There is certain latitude in the law for such things, at least in terms of trying to find out who is responsible."
His tone softened slightly, and he relaxed a tiny bit.
"That's the official reason why the probe is sanctioned anyway. The real reason for using the probe is that I suspect he wasn't actually sent by any house."
His wives gasped slightly, and the tiniest smile graced his lips as he glanced over each of them.
"I do get to surprise you, ladies, occasionally, still. No, I suspect that he was brainwashed and sent on this mission by these Altons. The houses do not use assassins much, not since great-great-grandfather issued a quiet decree that any house found guilty of using them would have the entire house stripped of status, their estates impounded, and everyone in the house, guilty or not, tossed into the street with the common folk."
Anibal blinked.
"So, that is what happened with House Linilga, sort of. It was also made known that anyone who tried to get some other house taken down with a false flag would suffer an even worse fate, and that is what Linilga did, almost before the ink was dry on the decree. You know that the house was de-elevated, and their descendants forbidden from rising for 3 generations, and their estates were burned, right? What you don't know, what was kept quiet, is that everyone actually involved in the conspiracy was also found. They were forced to sit and watch as their estates burned, and as everything they owned of value, including their business contracts, were auctioned off for a fraction of their worth. They were then surgically sterilized, and so was every person descended from their grandparents. Then the other members of the house, who had also lost title and all holdings, were told who in the house was responsible and given the evidence. It was then quietly announced that those people had no protection of law under the crown. They disappeared pretty quickly, and everyone seemed to get the message. Since then, there have been a few cases where assassins have actually been sought by certain members of certain houses. Those people tend to be dealt with by their own houses."
Anibal felt his face pale. To have your line cut off, to be denied hope of rebirth. I suppose it was effective, though. Still, I am not sure I wanted to know this. No, I am sure I didn't want to know this. I don't want to know the next answer. But I can't help myself.
"So there haven't been any since then?" "Only 3. two of them by minor houses that no one really noticed when they were struck down. The third was not too far into father's reign. 3 houses were going at each other, and someone finally managed to poison someone else. No one knew who, despite father's best efforts to find out. So, he gathered the top few ranks of each house together and took them deep into the bowels of the palace, to an old fighting arena that was used back in the Black Powder days. He told them he'd found an interesting custom in human history: dueling. He also told them that if there was one more assassination that he couldn't find the answer to, he was going to bring every single ranking member of their houses down that arena and make them fight to the death, 1-on-1, until only one house was left standing. He told them that the crown would make their arbitrators fully available to settle disputes and grievances, and he would hear all of their complaints that they wished to bring personally to him, but he wasn't going to let that sort of thing happen during his reign. It didn't either.
Inable had to find himself a chair.
I had no idea. Would he really have? He wouldn't have had much choice if they'd tested him. Inable, I see this distresses you, and I am sorry that I have to push this knowledge on you, but there are things you need to understand. The first is that our system of nobility, even with the reforms meant to make it more merit-based, has its downside. I know it is something you have seen. Too many of these nobles do not believe that the merit of a person alive today matters. All that matters is the merits of their ancestors, and that those merits give them a lot of entitlement. All this means that the noble houses must be kept in line with a velvet glove on an iron fist. It also means that the Feldarins must never be seen as making threats. This is a mantra we repeat over and over again to the nobility, and is drilled into each of us from the time we can walk. We don't make threats, we inform people of the consequences of their actions should they choose certain paths. This has, of course, led to some rather nasty things being done, but never without sufficient reason. Again, I don't tell you this to distress you, just so that you will realize that I mean it when I say that the houses wouldn't dare do such a thing.
Enable nodded. No, I'd rather not have known, but I can see why I might need to in what is coming. The question then formed in his mind and was out of his mouth before he could stop it.
What about the Queen? Did they try to test her?
The Duke gave him an odd smile, one which he had no idea how to interpret.
Oh, they did, of course. She waited and kept careful watch for it, and caught it early enough when it did that she didn't have to take extreme action. So, what did she do?
Damn it, Enable. Shut your blasted mouth. The Duke gave him that grin again, but nodded in what seemed to be respect. He had an oddly amused glint in his eye when he answered.
She threatened to have me deal with them, and give me carte blanche to do whatever I wanted with them and their houses if she ever even suspected that they might be thinking about such a thing. Hasn't had a single problem since.
Inable stared at him and had to make a conscious effort to close his mouth. He then felt himself laugh quietly. The tension of everything that had just happened came spilling out in that laugh, and he soon lost control. He nearly fell out of his chair from laughing so hard, but Lady Golna deftly stood behind him, put a hand on his shoulder, and steadied him until he got control again. He wiped the tears out of his eyes, nodded thanks to Lady Golna, and spoke to the Duke.
Thank you, Your Grace, for that. I suppose I shouldn't have asked. Telling me history is not the same as the current realities. Really, I guess that I'd rather not know anyway.
The Duke nodded to him.
You seemed like you needed a tension break. Like I said, I'm sorry I had to tell you all of this, and I know it has been hard for you to hear. You are a good man. I can see why my sister likes you so much. I think you and I are going to be good friends as well.
His face hardened, and he leaned forward to raise a finger at him.
However, the next time you use one of those damned honorifics at me when we are in private, I am going to tease you mercilessly, and otherwise work to make you regret it. Are we clear?
The sudden change of tone caught him off guard. It shouldn't have, but he'd reached his limit several shocks ago. He answered with a sober nod. A tinkling laughter sounded beside him, and Lady Yora's voice floated through the air.
That is, unless you are using the honorific to tease him, of course. Very useful when he starts putting on airs in private to give you a hard time. Isn't that right, Your High and Mighty Royalness?
She giggled, and Inable had to suppress a smile as the Duke gave her a stern look, shook his head, and gave him that long-suffering look that males of all species wear from time to time, and can be summed up with the word women. Hannibal grinned at him, looked around at Caslor's 3 wives, thought of his aunt, and returned the Duke's look. I wonder if it is too late to wave her off?